I am Josie Herrera, and this is my persuasive speech. For my audience members, I have my mom, my friend Brittany, my friend Nicole, my friend Candy, and my friend Jody. And I also have my 5 note cards. Addiction plagues millions of people every year. It destroys families, relationships, and leads to incarceration and death. Unfortunately, many addicts don't receive the help they need because we have a system built on conviction rather than rehabilitation. This is because many people falsely believe addiction is a choice instead of a disease. Due to lack of education, a vast majority of Americans believe that addiction is a choice, not an illness, despite medical determinations stating otherwise. This fosters an environment that can make rehabilitation and recovery difficult for addicts. By expanding education and awareness of the disease concept and making resources more available, drug abuse and incarceration would decrease. I have been in recovery for almost 7 years, and had I not been given the opportunity to make a change, recidivism could have been a part of my story. Today, we will discuss evidence-based theories that prove that addiction is in fact a disease rather than a choice, and that we as a society need to change our collective perspective on addiction and how it should be treated. I believe you will come away with a different perspective and opinion of addicts. Drug addiction affects our nation in several ways, but our reaction to addiction is equally important and bears its own consequences. A society that falsely interprets addiction as a choice has serious consequences to members of that society. A large percentage of Americans believe addiction to be a matter of choice rather than a disease. In turn, addicts are convicted for drug possession rather than treated for their disease. In 1956, the American Medical Association declared alcoholism a disease. And in 1987, addiction was also classified as a disease. This was reported by Kathy and Daniel Angers in 2010. Despite these declarations, many Americans still believe addiction is a choice. The Center for Addiction published an article in April of 2017 that stated, "Choice does not determine whether something is a disease. Diabetes and some forms of cancer involve personal choices like diet, exercise, sun exposure, etc. A disease is what happens in the body as a result of those choices. Our jails and prisons are flooded with individuals with drug possession convictions. Lack of treatment resources for addicts lead to more overdoses, homelessness, and recidivism." Excuse me. Recidivism occurs when a person who is convicted of a crime and incarcerated continues to relapse into criminal activity. It becomes a continuous cycle. When an addict is charged with a drug offense and not treated, and no treatment options are presented, the propensity of relapse and incarceration charges increases. Additionally, as the addiction progresses, the addict will commit more crimes to support their addiction. Having multiple drug convictions can prevent a person from having meaningful employment. Due to being unemployable, many addicts turn to crime to support themselves and their habit. These barriers add to the cycle of addiction. Many people inflicted with the disease go untreated. American Addiction Centers reported in 2020 on their website that an estimated 20.7 million people 12 and older need substance use disorder treatment. Only 4 million, or 19%, receive it. And this is a clip from a video that was made by the American Addiction Centers on the disease concept.
I think it's best to first look at what is considered a disease in the first place. We asked Dr. Tom Daub, the Chief Clinical Officer and Chief Compliance Officer for American Addiction Centers, what is a disease?
So a disease, the American Medical Association looks at a few factors when thinking about what actually constitutes a disease. First, it's really about looking at something that's wrong with the body, some dysfunction of the body. Second, that dysfunction has to have certain signs and symptoms that are consistent that define the disease. And third, it really has to cause harm to the body in some way. So that's really why we think of addiction, like other kinds of illnesses, as being a disease. It comes from the body, it has consistent signs and symptoms, and it causes harm.
How long has addiction been considered a disease?
What we know about addiction...
Despite the recognition of addiction being a disease in medical and mental health communities, there remains a stigma around addiction. Many family members ask their relatives that are struggling with addiction, why can't you just quit? They believe the addict has a choice in the matter and that by not just stopping, they are weak or morally deficient. Although addiction begins with a choice, the continued use of substances becomes a coping mechanism to deal with pain and traumas. Many addicts grow up in good homes with minimal abuses and traumas. Despite growing up with multiple protective factors and decreased risk factors, they are still plagued by addiction. This is more evidence to back up the disease concept. Additionally, addiction is non-discriminate. People that grow up in environments with high risk factors are also plagued with the disease of addiction. We are not powerless over the current status of mainstream society. Change begins with us. There are ways to incite change on a local level, as well as ways to change the way addicts are treated in the judicial system. The first way we can incite change is by raising awareness and education on the disease concept. We can organize community events to help bridge the gap between the recovery community and the mainstream community. If community members see that addicts in recovery are functional members of society contributing to the success of that community, they will change their perspective. On a larger scale, advocacy for reform and legislation that promotes rehab and treatment over incarceration would help the disease. This will help with prison population and a decline in recidivism. For these reasons, we should, as a collective society, learn to view addiction in a different light. Lack of treatment option for addicts leads to recidivism and stems from a lack of understanding of the disease concept regarding addiction. By lack of treatment options for addicts leads to recidivism and stems from a lack of understanding the disease concept regarding addiction. Our first point again, that a society that believes that addiction is a choice rather than a disease does a disservice to that community. Our second point is more harm is done to addicts who miss out on the opportunity to change and heal. Education, awareness, and legislation reform can alter the way society perceives addiction. You may know someone with a disease of addiction, or you may not. Remember to keep an open mind. By changing our beliefs and our institutions to harbor an environment of recovery rather than punishment, we can help addicts obtain a new lease on life.